Trump has made it clear he wants to end the war in Ukraine as quickly as he can, irrespective of what that means for Ukrainians. America temporarily suspended military aid to Ukraine in early March, which hampered Ukrainian operations on the ground. Even though the interruption in intelligence sharing lasted about a week, the battlefield has changed a lot since then. Thousands of Ukrainian troops who stormed into Russia's Kursk region last August were almost surrounded by Russian forces in just a few days. It was a major blow to Ukraine's war effort, arguably its biggest loss in the conflict so far. Trump has now lifted the suspension on Ukrainian aid, but the events and rhetoric of the last few weeks have damaged transatlantic unity. Europe is waking up to a new geopolitical reality where it can no longer rely on America for its defense. In light of this, Portugal has recently dropped its plan to buy US-produced F-35s and is instead looking for European-made alternatives. Sweden might be next to reconsider, and others too. Only a fraction of Europe's F-35's total orders have been delivered. And if relations between the US and the EU keep falling out, the Europeans could cancel these orders altogether. In a world where America is no longer a dependable ally, the EU will look to replace US weapons and, at the same time, build its own defense industries. Now is the perfect time to act. Nothing moves a politician faster than the sound of distant gunfire. But companies are moving just as fast. With new funding coming about, European stock markets are surging. All the defense giants are up in the double digits. However, investing can be difficult. So why not let AI lend a hand? That's precisely what Candlestick AI does, the sponsor of today's video. It automates investing for beginners in the stock market. Hedge funds and big Wall Street players have used similar technology to gain financial advantage for years. It's just now, for the first time ever, that AI can balance the playing field. Candlestick AI integrates financial data, market news, and technical information to identify investment opportunities that human investors might miss. It takes less than 10 minutes to set up for customers in the US. Just download the app and tell Candlestick your investment preferences, and you'll get a tailored AI portfolio that fits your needs. The AI advisor then automatically handles the rest, including buying, selling, and optimizing your strategies. With each decision, the AI advisor even gives you a custom-generated interactive investment report so that you can understand the reasons why the stock was chosen. Of course, these AI-generated insights do not guarantee future performance. Use them at your own discretion. Candlestick AI just makes investing easier for beginners. For more information, check out their app in the description. Sometimes, money isn't just the answer, it's the only answer. On March 4th, the EU announced a program called Rearm Europe. It promises to unlock up to 800 billion euros to mobilize the continent's industrial base and plug gaps in its arsenals, which translates to roughly $860 billion. More specifically, the EU's new program looks to relax debt regulations so that members can take out loans to boost military expenditures. The plan is to take out 650 billion euros in loans from the European Investment Bank and use that to increase defense spending to 3.5% of GDP across the board. Additionally, the program looks to create a 150 billion euro collective loan fund, which would allow more of the EU's own budget to be spent on defense. So, while the plan will not immediately raise new funds, it could galvanize higher spending down the line. Financially, the results are already pouring in. For the first time in more than 30 years, Europe's defense sector is hot property. Defense company valuations have jumped to all-time highs. Some groups are up more than 40% since the start of the year. There are over 36 European defense companies that are in the world's top 100 by defense revenue. This is where they are located. And while good times are ahead for all, some stand to benefit more than others. Germany's Rheinmetall, Britain's BAE Systems, Finland's and Norway's Nammo, and KNDS, which is an alliance of France's Nexter and Germany's Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann, are the upfront winners. In the coming years, these conglomerates are likely to take up large orders for armored vehicles, engines, munitions, electronics, and all sorts of armaments. Rheinmetall, for instance, which produces armored vehicles, howitzers, ammunition, and more, has seen its market value skyrocket in recent weeks. It now tops that of Volkswagen. The same stock performance is seen by Leonardo, Saab, and BAE Systems, while America's defense giants are in decline. Suffice it to say, Europe's defense giants are about to enter a golden age. However, cranking up complex multinational programs will take time, and not all American-made weapons can be readily replicated. Take the Patriot as an example, which is one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. It consists of a radar system and mobile launchers that can fire interceptor missiles at incoming projectiles or aircraft. Up until now, the Patriot has been Europe's primary air defense system. However, as the EU is expected to flow more funding into air defense and missile systems, many of its members are looking for ways to replace American weaponry, the Patriot included. And while no alternative is quite as good as the Patriot, SAMP-T missiles come the closest. This system is made by Eurosam, a joint venture between Pan-European Missile Champion MBDA and France's Thales. EU members will have to make significant investments in these companies. Another strategic domain requiring urgent and substantial investing is in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR for short. Nearly all ISR in the Ukraine war was provided by the Americans. One of the most effective means to collect ISR is by signals intelligence aircraft. These can intercept, gather, and analyze enemy communications, radar emissions, and other electronic signals with the intent of gaining strategic and tactical advantages. This may come as a shock, but Europe only has a handful of these aircraft. Finland, France, and Italy each have one, while Sweden has two. Britain and Turkey have three each, but the rest of Europe is completely in the dark when it comes to ISR. This needs to change, and soon. Germany's Hensoldt is working on an indigenous signals intelligence aircraft called Pegasus, but it's still years away. Meanwhile, Sweden's Saab has capabilities in early warning and control systems, but lacks an airborne craft. If the EU is going to develop its own ISR capabilities, it will have to come from these two companies. Another area where Europe has come to depend on the US is satellite communication. In Ukraine, for instance, America's Starlink has been key in integrating data on the battlefield and linking that back to the Ukrainian troops on the ground. Europe doesn't have a Starlink program of its own, at least not with the same latency and bandwidth. So that's another defense gap in need of major investment. French satellite operator Eutelsat may be able to help. It owns OneWeb and is currently in talks with EU governments to create a contingency plan for Ukraine in case Starlink was to withdraw its services. However, Europe will need both a sword and a shield to deter Russia. Recently, Italy's Leonardo and Turkey's Baykar signed a memorandum of understanding for the development of unmanned technologies. The EU lags behind in drones, and its market is valued at approximately $100 billion. The Italian-Turkish joint venture can meet that demand. But perhaps the most complicated hardware to replace is the F-35. Some European lawmakers are debating the potential kill switch in the aircraft. This is a long-held rumor that the US can remotely disable the F-35 should its strategic interests change. True or not, that's a topic for a different time. As it stands now, however, Europe has no immediate alternative for the F-35, at least not with those specific capabilities. French aviation giant Dassault recently announced plans to double the production of Rafale fighter jets to 4 or 5 per month by 2026. That means between 50 to 60 Rafale jets will become available per year. If Britain, Germany, Spain and Italy could likewise boost the production of the Eurofighter, and if Sweden's Saab could do the same with the Gripen, Europe could steadily wean itself of US-made aircraft. However, none of these aircraft are anywhere near the F-35 in terms of capabilities, and therefore could only serve as a stopgap measure. In the long run, Europe will have to acquire a 5th-generation aircraft of its own, but one that is non-American. Turkey's Kaan is a 5th-generation aircraft that comes close to the F-35 in capacity. It's being developed by Turkish Aerospace, and it's packed with indigenous subsystems with supply chains close to Europe. There are other pan-European programs as well, such as the Future Combat Air System and the Global Combat Air Program, but these are 6th-generation aircraft and decades away from entering service. Basically, Europe tried skipping a generation of aircraft and now has little to fall back on. This then leaves the Turkish project as the only feasible option, which is scheduled for mass production by 2028. That said, acquiring the Turkish aircraft might get complicated. Relations between Turkey and Europe have been strained for years, so both sides would need to step up engagement and improve ties before making long-term strategic commitments. The point is that not all weapons can be replicated within the Eurozone, at least not quickly. So, in some categories, gaps will have to be plugged by buying off the shelf from abroad. Turkey and South Korea are often seen as viable alternative suppliers, and some EU members are already tuning in. For instance, since 2022, Poland has signed $16 billion worth of contracts with South Korean defense firms. The order includes tanks, howitzers, aircraft, rocket launchers, and so on. More such arrangements could be made with non-EU suppliers. That said, not everyone in Europe is happy about bringing in faraway suppliers. French and German lobbyists are now clashing over whether the €150 billion collective fund could be spent on arms made outside the bloc. German Chancellor Scholz says the initiative should be open to like-minded non-EU partners, such as Britain, Norway, Switzerland and Turkey. However, French President Macron, who has long advocated for strategic autonomy, argues that spending should be confined strictly to EU producers. So, in typical European fashion, the €150 billion fund could get derailed by politics. But even so, this would only be a minor hiccup in the grand scheme of things. The rest of the Rearm Europe program, €650 billion, comes from national debt and is thus not subject to EU vetoes. One EU state cannot veto what another state will do with its own budget, so every nation will have the option to buy the weapons needed. On paper, Europe possesses more than enough resources to defend itself and support Ukraine at the same time. In 2024, the combined GDP of the European Union eclipsed $19 trillion, dwarfing Russia's $2 trillion economy. Russia doesn't even rank among the world's top 10 economies. It trails behind Germany, Britain, France, and Italy. Not surprisingly, Europe also holds an edge over Russia in military spending. In 2024, the EU collectively spent about $457 billion on defense, while Russia spent $146 billion. Meanwhile, in terms of population, Europe's 449 million citizens outnumber Russia's 145 million. Moscow's only strategic advantage is in nuclear weapons. But even there, Britain and France have enough nukes to provide the rest of Europe with a credible deterrence. In sum, by leveraging its economic strength, demographic advantage, and military potential, Europe could confidently counter Russia and provide Ukraine with the support it needs. It's just a matter of transforming its resources into effective policy and action. But long-term political commitment is the key. Europe's armed forces have been hollowed out by decades of disrepair. There are substantial gaps in their capabilities. Some are even incapable of combined arms. For decades, critical enablers were simply outsourced to the United States, including aerial refueling, heavy lift, logistics, and even basic operations such as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. America took care of everything, and Europe is now going to have to relearn what it means to run a combat-ready military. For all of that, the Rearm Europe package is not going to be nearly enough, but it could be a start. If European governments can follow through on their spending promises with long-term contracts, European defense giants could eventually fill America's shoes. But to stay on track, the EU will have to keep pumping additional hundreds of billions into its defense. The EU package as it stands now can't be a one-time thing. Defense spending will require expansive and permanent state outlays. A study by Bruegel and the Kiel Institute argues that the EU needs to spend an additional $261 billion every year on defense on top of the existing expenditures. This would bring the EU's collective defense budget to $727 billion, a substantial hike. Financing this will be tricky since taking out too many loans could backfire. The EU has gone through this before, most recently during the 2008 financial crisis. As before, inflation could surge as debt piles up. So, to raise the necessary funding over a long period without triggering double-digit inflation will require the Europeans to do something that they really don't want to. They can either slash social spending or raise taxes. In comparing the two options, it's more justifiable to cut social spending than it is to increase taxes. For the majority of Europeans, the welfare state is the natural way of things, but when compared to historical and contemporary standards, it's not. Back in 2012, Germany's long-serving Chancellor, Merkel, made a statement that has aged quite well. She pointed out that Europe accounted for 7% of the world's population, a quarter of its economic output, but up to half its social spending. Those numbers have since changed somewhat, but her point still stands. For Europe, there is no way of permanently increasing defense spending without cuts to social spending. A fortress cannot be built on handouts. So, to stand strong, Europe must lighten its load. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of what we do, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and mayhaps share the video. In any case, thank you for your time, and Sağ ol.